morning. We have a lot of new faces and new members, and one thing we have not done for a while is read our congregational covenant, an agreement that we make together about how we are going to conduct ourselves and live as a fellowship. We enter beloved community intentionally, living our values with grace, love, and celebration. We do this by listening with kindness and respect, speaking honestly with sensitivity, acting with compassion and acceptance, embracing our joys and sorrows, encouraging each other's spiritual journey, sharing our gifts and strengths in service to the greater good. When we fall out of covenant, we recognize, reflect, and re-engage. We forgive and begin again in love. Now, we are very fortunate because Steve Clem turned this into a song. We'd like you all to stand and join us in singing this song. The words are either on the slides or in your order of worship. Good morning again. My name is Lynn, Madson. Welcome to the home of Unitarian Universalism in Central Washington. I serve on your worship team and the Ministerial Search Committee, and I am your celebrant for today's service. If you are a visitor this morning, we are so glad you are here. We welcome every person of goodwill, just exactly as you are. However you get around, whomever you love, whatever body you inhabit, whatever your age, you are welcome here. We invite everybody to join us for a social hour after the service, both in person and on Zoom. So after the service last week, Mary and I were walking down by the Ducky Pond, which is one of our favorite walks near our house. And we were walking along, and Mary said, "I'm having a very Catholic thought." She said, the coffee hour is actually like our communion. But we don't actually always treat it that way. And I thought, she's right. We as Unitarians so often spend our time in communion with food and drink and conversation. We pride ourselves on the sense of community that we have. And I wonder what it would be like if we thought, as we visited, as we enjoyed those treats, as we drank our coffee or whatever, if we thought we are engaging in the sacred act of maintaining our community. So, please take a moment and greet your friends right now. It is important to take some time every Sunday to acknowledge the story of the land our congregation sits on. We gather on the homeland of the Pasquosa, where they lived for generations upon generations as stewards of this land. The Pasquosa people still live here. As I thought about our service today for beloved community, I thought about what are the fundamental differences between the way that the European settlers viewed the land and property, and the way the indigenous, the indigenous folks viewed the land. And I came up with this quote from Chief Makina, a Mahawat chief who died in 1795. So this is a long time ago. He said, "Once I was in Victoria and I saw a very large house. They told me it was a bank, and that white men placed their money there to be taken care of, and that by and by they got it back with interest. We are Indians. We have no such bank. But when we have plenty of money or blankets, we give them away to other chiefs and people, and by they return them with interest, and our hearts feel good. Our way of giving is our bank." Non-Indigenous people and corporations, including CUUF and us as members, continue to profit from the colonization of this land. Only through examining our part in maintaining privilege and forming a true partnership with the Pasquosa people will decolonization and meaningful reparations be achieved. You can find further information on the Colville Tribe website and at the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. The Pasquosa continue their traditions and seek to have all of their rights recognized.
We link ourselves to all Unitarian Universalists who call themselves UUs. There are Unitarians and Universalists in the world who also link themselves to us by carving the flaming chalice on the posts of their doors, putting them in images in their worship spaces, saying that they are aligned and connected to us. We use the light of the chalice to remind ourselves of the power of community. The flaming chalice is a symbol of the community because, like each of us, it has a body shaped from this earth, made of soil, water, and heat. Its light is an image of the shining truth that awakens our minds. Its burning is a reminder of the warm hope that guides our community. Its small flame reminds us of the great love that calls to us over and over again, drawing us together.
So our first reading today, and because I'm doing it, you know one of them at least is from Hafiz. You carry all the ingredients to turn your life into a nightmare. Don't mix them. You have all the genius to build a swing in your backyard for God. That sounds like a hell of a lot more fun. So let's start laughing, drawing blueprints, gathering our talent friends. I will help you with my divine lyre and drum. Hafez will sing 1,000 words you can take into your hands like golden saws, silver hammers, polished teakwood, strong silk rope. You carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Mix them, mix them. And our second reading is from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Justice Without Violence, in a speech he delivered on April 3rd, 1957. There are certain things we can say about this method that seeks justice without violence. It does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win their friendship and understanding. I think that this is one of the basic distinguishing points between violence and nonviolence. The ultimate end of violence is to defeat the opponent. The ultimate end of nonviolence is to win the friendship of the opponent. It is necessary to boycott sometimes, but the nonviolent resistor realizes that boycott is never an end within itself, but merely a means to awaken a sense of shame within the oppressor. It is the love of God working in the lives of men and women. This is the love that may well be the salvation of our civilization. But the end is reconciliation, and the end is redemption. The end is the creation of beloved community. Now, Steve has a story.
And good morning. Well, this is a story that has been told over centuries in many different faiths: the Christian faith, Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, Hindu, and in different cultures also, in non-religious settings. And it's from as early as the 13th century. Some of you may have heard it, but this is a little bit of a different adaptation. So there was a young girl, Teresa, And she was a very curious young girl. And one day she was listening to the adults talk about a friend that had died. And it was very sad. And they were talking about that the person was going to go somewhere, but they weren't sure where the person was going to go, and it was going to be something called the afterlife. Well, being curious as she was, she wanted to find out what this was all about, and so she knew it was about that time. If she went to the garden, she would find her great-grandmother, Nana, sitting in her favorite spot, just enjoying the sun. And she said, "Nana, I have a question. What happens when we die? Where do we go? Do we go somewhere?" And Nana said, "Well, some people believe that when you die, you go to a different place, depending upon whether or not you've been a good person or a bad person." That was puzzling to Teresa. It was very puzzling. And so she said, "So where do the bad people go?" And Nana said, "Child, close your eyes. And if you want to close your eyes, you can." So picture a very long white hallway. And at the end of this long hallway, there are two doors. And open the door on the right. And there you will see a beautiful banquet hall filled with couches and chairs and pillows and long tables filled everywhere with bowls and bowls of delicious food, and the aroma is just wonderful. Well, Teresa was more puzzled. This looks like a wonderful, beautiful place. This is for the bad people? And Nana said, "Now look at all the people a little more closely that are sitting at the tables. Notice that they have very short arms. And they have very long spoons. And these people can get a spoon into a bowl to get food, but they can't bring the spoon to their mouth to eat. No matter how hard they try, their short arms won't get there." Well, these people are starving. They're miserable. They're so unhappy. And with her eyes still closed, Teresa cried and said, "This is just a horrible place. It is so horrible. But where do the good people go? Where, if I'm a good person, will I be?" And Nana said, "Let's walk out of the room with your eyes closed. Okay. You see the door that you came through? Go into the other door. And in this door, you're going to see a beautiful banquet hall. And you're going to see couches, pillows, and chairs, and big, long tables with bowls and bowls of food that are just look delicious, and the aroma is so marvelous. Oh, Teresa, isn't it lovely?" And Teresa says, "It looks just like the other place, and I don't understand." And her grandmother said, "Well, look closely." And she said, "Well, if I look closely, these are the people that they have very short spoons, and they can feed themselves." And Nana said, "Look more closely. Everything is the same. All the people in this room have short arms, and all of them have very long spoons." Oh, now Teresa was very confused and very puzzled. She said, "I don't understand, Nana. The people in the room, they're all smiling, they're laughing, they're happy. And Nana said, "Child, open up your eyes." And she smiled at Teresa and took a very deep breath. And she reached out with her hands and just held gently onto Teresa's face. And she said, "My child, these people are healthy and they're happy because they are lovingly feeding each other." And that is today's story.
If children want to stay for the rest of the service, you may stay, but if we want to go off to the classrooms or outside, whatever we're doing, that's also possible, and I'm told that people will make a little archway for you and guide you on your way, and we'll all sing a song to make that happen. So you gonna stay here? Is she going? I've been invited to give 2 sermons this week and last week and be a part of creation of worship, partially just to introduce me and my style and my theology to you and me to this community. If you're new to this community, I hope that you have been introduced to the spirit and the power of Unitarian Universalism. Last week I spoke about beauty, the beauty of the earth, what could be called the harmony or the numinous joy of life. I also spoke about my father, an outdoorsman and a political science professor, and I mentioned my first birthday in the mountains with both of my parents. Now, to be clear, my mom did like camping. My mom loved travel. She loved to enjoy both natural and human-made wonders of the world. But much more than camping, my mom loved parties. She loved laughing and dancing and sharing with friends. She was a social, outgoing person. When I was about 12 years old, she decided that she had mastered well enough being a middle-class homemaker that had bridge parties and the faculty dames to her house. And she decided that she wanted to do something a little different. And so she decided she wanted to become a real estate agent. There was a bell ringing in her heart. And the friends who helped transform her life, the people who gave her the courage and power to do that, were people who enjoyed living, people who explored a self-empowering, positive thought, very feminist form of spirituality, and most of them were Unitarian Universalists. When I was, back then, before that, I had been a very, very quiet, bookish, somewhat dreamy boy. I was not excited by basketball. I was not excited by baseball or football. I did play baseball. I was out in right field because that was the least amount of action, right? Even by high school, I had 2 or 3 other children even though I went to school with the same people for 9 years. There was only 2 or maybe 3 that I really considered close friends. And then in September of 1977, my mom said that her friends at the UU Fellowship in Greeley were forming a youth group, and that they were all required to bring a youth to that party. And she said, "You are my youth." To be clear, she was a very youthful person, so she had lots of youth, but I was her youth person. And I went to that party, and then I went to the Sunday worship, and then I went to youth retreats, and my life was completely changed. From then on, I went from having only 2 or 3 sort of friends to having hundreds of friends in many different cities, all up and down the Front Range, and now all across the continent. Remember, I used the word spirituality. Spirituality denotes how each of us as individuals find deep meaning. And religion is how we share spirituality. The two are not always maybe not even often congruent in an individual's life. The way in which they find meaning and the way in which they share that with other people may be different. But when the two come together, when the two are perfectly in sync, then we experience the beloved community. Capital B and a capital C. And then we begin to live for the beloved community. This term, beloved community, was popularized by Martin Luther King Jr., who got it himself from the incomparable Reverend Howard Thurman. And Howard Thurman had understood the deep truth that was forged by the philosopher Josiah Royce. Sorry, it's a chain of men, thinking men, privileged men, but black men, except for Royce's white guy. In 1913, Josiah Royce published his opus, his magnum opus, on religious community. He was a philosopher. He was thinking about what it is and how do we talk about it clearly and logically to be loyal to one another and to form community. And he was something of an idealist, so he wasn't talking about just nice communities that we really care about a lot, so very well-loved communities, beloved in the sense of I love it. But he was an idealist, and so he was thinking about what is the transcendent reality that moves through our lives and becomes present in our lives. And he used this phrase, beloved community, to invoke that ideal. Loyalty made present, loyalty to loyalty itself that anchors an individual in a community. You notice that the great moral developments throughout history involved individuals' loyalty to ideals in community. He opposed the sort of heroic individualism, sort of idealism that was associated with people like Walt Whitman or Ralph Waldo Emerson or William James, because he felt none of them went far enough. Of course, Royce also did not go far enough. He didn't talk much about the overt, blatant discrimination against women in his age. But he did affirm this powerful community that could include people and draw them in. He wrote, "Since the office of religion is to aim towards the creation on earth of the beloved community, the future task of religion is the task of inventing and applying the arts which will win over all to unity, which shall overcome our original hatefulness by gracious love, not mere individuality, but individuals in communities." And he described these communities in various ways. What was present? When did you know it was there? And a simple way to talk about it is he talked about how they had a shared present, a shared past, and a shared future. He used reverence, memory, and hope. Reverence is found in that sense of connection that transcends beyond the limits of our own individual lives, where we realize we connect to other people, but we connect in a way that pulls us into something larger. I heard a story, and I can tell this story because my religious heritage, I claim, is both Jewish and Christian. And I've had lots of Jewish Christian friends, and we've all been allies and good friends and worked together to build the beloved community. But there were these two women. Sarah comes into the synagogue. Sarah comes in and she sees Rachel up in the front, and she goes over to Rachel and she says, "Rachel, you look troubled. What's going on?" And Rachel said, I can't talk about it. And Sarah says, "You have to talk about it. You can trust me." And Rachel said, "I don't know if I can say it." And Sarah says, "You have to." And so Rachel begins to talk, and Rachel says, "My son, you know my son, he was going off to college to become a teacher. It turns out he's also become a Christian." Forgetting where I was. Sarah, Rachel, she says, you can't understand how much pain this is. And Sarah says, "I can understand this. I can understand this because my son went off to college. You know my son, he was going to be a rabbi, and he has become a Christian." And the two of them are filled with pain, and they're crying about this. And they said, "We should pray to God Pray to God to comfort us in our time of sorrow and forgive us for whatever failings as Jewish mothers have blighted our lives and our community. And so they start to pray, and then they hear this resonance voice, this voice in the synagogue. And it said, "It is so good to be with two people who know exactly how I feel." These connections that are resonant and present in our lives, that bring healing, that bring wholeness, that bring people together. King talked about redemption. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about redemption often because he was a Christian, trying to redeem all of the diverse people of America. And it was always beyond creeds. The beloved community, for Royce especially, was always beyond any creeds or doctrines. It's not about beliefs. It's not about ideas you have in your head. It's about those ways in which we identify with one another present and see the holy moving, not only in our own lives, but in everyone else's life. Coretta Scott King invoked this by saying, "The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate action of its members." But of course, compassion is not alone is not enough unless it pulls you beyond your own limit. Also, you need a shared history. A shared history that helps you identify, not only just in the moment, not just in the present, but it gives roots and a past to your connections. Lynn sort of raised that up today, talking about the past of our land, that how we have different stories. There are many people who have very different stories, very different understandings, and to bring those stories together, to bind ourselves together, is difficult work. So Unitarian Universalist minister Rosemary Bray McNatt. Rosemary is now the president of Starr King University. It's been ordained for quite some time. Starr King University, by the way, was named for a really great Unitarian evangelist. And you know he was great because of his first name, Thomas Starr King. Rosemary met Coretta Scott King near the end of Coretta's life, and the two of them were talking about a writing project that they would do together. Didn't end up doing that project. But at one point, Rosemary mentioned that she was going to become a Unitarian Universalist, studying to be a Unitarian Universalist minister. And Coretta's response was, "Oh, I went to Unitarian churches for years, even before I met Martin." And then she mentioned that, Coretta mentioned that she'd been part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which my mother had been an ardent, active member of for all of her life. And it was founded by Unitarian Universalists, right? Unitarians especially. And Martin and I, Coretta said, Mrs. King said, Martin and I went to Unitarian churches when we were in Boston. And then Rosemary says what surprised me and saddened me was what she said next. Can't remember the exact words, but she said basically, Coretta King had said, "We gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarian at one time." This is in the late 40s and 50s, so it would have been just Unitarian. But Martin and I realized we could never build a mass movement of people labeled as black in the Unitarian Church, because our stories were very different. And this is despite the fact that Ellen Watkins Harper, back in the early 1800s, a great writer, well-known writer at the time, black woman, had a membership in a Unitarian church and in an AME. Her father was an AME minister, church. She went back and forth between the two. And there were Universalist preachers that were black. There had been this long chain of involvement in anti-slavery movement, and yet the two stories were not yet unified. The NAACP was primarily founded by Unitarians. The end up in the National Association for Colored People, and yet our stories were still separate. We didn't have this sense of shared history enough because we hadn't been mixing enough together. We hadn't been connecting enough together. We are doing better. Back in 1998, there were only 2% of Unitarian Universalists were blacks. We're now up to 3%. In 1998, the number of Hispanic people in the U.S. was 11%, and the number of Hispanic people in Unitarian Universalist churches in 98 was 1%. Now, it's gone from U.S. percentage of Hispanic people has increased significantly up to 15% from 11%. And in Unitarian Universalists, we've gone from that 1% to 3%. How do we find those connections? How do we share those stories? How do we listen to the people, to the Pascosa people, to the Hispanic-speaking people, to the people of Asian descent, and to the people of black identity, of all different identities, and make those stories all become one story to bring us together. The story of this church goes back to 1984, and I love the who here is a founder? Are there founders here that are actually? You want to raise your? Yeah, one of the founders is over here, and over here, we have a few people who were here. The voice, yes, at the very beginning. It's powerful to have that history. It matters. These people should be, you celebrate. Because I've been in congregations where they were formed in 1859, and we talk about the founders, but you couldn't see any of them. But that's a marker of endurance and continuity that goes back through the 1800s, through the 1700s, all the different Unitarian and Universalist people. And before that, in Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Before that, those Jewish people who came to understand that their particular ethnic identity, their ethnic deity was not theirs alone, but was really part of that universal oneness, that one truth that binds all human beings together. That universalist history goes back centuries. And the more that we understand that we are not something that's just appeared here and now, in this moment, but that we have this history with all of the rest of humanity. Taoists in China who didn't even know of this continent are part of our heritage and our history that we're trying to rise up, and the more we can figure out how to bring that greater story together, the more powerful and present the beloved community will be. And then the last element is memory and reverence. Reverence is presence, and memory is the past. The final element of being truly in the beloved community is a shared vision of the future, that we're all going together. And we know these big churches and religions that get lots of people coming in still have a very radically exclusive view, and they will say those people won't be there. The bad people won't be there. The bad people who don't understand how to use long-handled spoons, right? They're not going to be there. They might be burned up in fire, or they're going to be off in some terrible place. But we know that anyone can learn to be in the beloved community, can be moved by that powerful love that brings us together to feed one another, to identify with one another, to create a deeper history going into the past. And they have a future, a sense that we are going there together, that we will all get there somehow. Martin King, that one great sermon when he said, "How long?" I said, "Not long." And he wasn't talking just about how long it'll be until we get the civil rights legislation passed. He was talking ultimately about the fact that the beloved community is always here, it's always present, and yet never really here completely. And so we had to keep working for it. I remember a story once about Unitarian Universalist Church that got together at the beginning of this, it was a fellowship, beginning of the fellowship. They had announcements. And one of the announcements was there's going to be a special meeting of the board, the board after the service, to discuss the future of this congregation. And so afterwards, they kind of gathered after the coffee socialization. They all gathered together, and there was a newcomer there. This guy had never been there before. They'd never seen him before. They didn't know who he was. And he introduced himself, and they said, the minister looked over and said, do you understand this is a meeting of the board of the congregation to talk about the future of this congregation? And the guy said, yeah, I figured after that service I'm at least as bored as the rest of you. He had some vision of what would be exciting, and I think we all have a shared vision of what would be exciting to go to together into the future. Deep memories that bring us together, a deep awareness of what is similar and powerful that binds us together, and a loyalty to a future that goes beyond the limits and the boundaries of today. Vision of the beloved community in which we all will sing with one voice. To close the service, we extinguish a flame. I will read some words, a variation of the traditional words, and then Lynn will extinguish that flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth that shines in beloved community, nor do we lose the warmth of being in beloved community, nor do we end the fire of commitment that burns in each heart to reach the beloved community. These we will carry with us in our hearts until we are together again.